Welcome to another episode of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is my old friend and colleague, Scott Eblin. I'll tell you about Scott in just a moment. LinkedIn, this show poses questions to thought leaders and doers like Scott, whose ideas and actions are really helping us come to better grips of ourselves and our world. Grace Under Pressure reveals what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment, the connecting that we feel toward others. And for me, grace is a spirit of generosity we show, respect we demonstrate to others, and the compassion we exhibit. Doing this as a leader requires an outward exertion of action and the ability to mobilize. And Scott embodies all of these things. So welcome, Scott. Thank you.
Hey, John. Thank you. I'm really happy to be in conversation with you yet again, only this time in front of a bunch of people. So,
okay. Well, I want to tell folks a little bit about you. You've been in business for, 5 months now? Oh, no.
Yeah, about 5 weeks, no, about 20 years, actually.
More than decades. You are truly a trusted coach and advisor to senior leaders and tens of thousands through your books and your public speaking engagements. Scott is a person who has a real depth to him, and I've always been in awe of Scott's persona. He just has this sense about him that says, tell me more. And the word trust really gets to the essence of who Scott is. He's a best-selling author of a couple of books, The Next Level, What Insiders Know About Executive Success, which I think has gone into 3 editions,
Right.
and Overworked, Overwhelmed, The Mindfulness Alternative. Scott is an honors graduate of Davidson, holds a master's in public administration from Harvard Kennedy School, and way cool to me, he also graduated from a coaching program at my alma mater, Georgetown, where he was on faculty for more than 10 years. Scott also teaches yoga and practices it. So welcome, Scott.
Welcome, John. Thank you.
Great. Scott, I always open with this question. We're in perilous times, tenuous times. We're, a time of uncertainty. So what are you hearing from your clients? And
when is it going to go back to normal? There are variations on that theme. A lot of, it's not quite that simple, but I think with a lot of people I talk to, there's a yearning and a longing for that. Understandably, I think we all kind of yearn and long for that. But in the meantime, how do we make it work in the meantime? And a lot of clients, I think from the standpoint of getting things done, most of my clients are making it work, right? But the question, I think, the longer pandemic world goes on, the longer we've all gone without a legitimate break, and vacation. And so I think how do I keep people engaged? How do I keep myself focused, fresh, enthusiastic, energetic? All of those things are coming up a lot. I think a lot of folks have figured out the mechanics at this point of keeping the team, focused and moving forward. But now it's more about the, like you said in the opening, the soft stuff.
Right. It's interesting listening to you, Scott. There's a weariness about this as the longer it goes on, and I think at first people just dove in and tackled it. But now the reality of it month after month with no end in sight, this is tiring, is it not? So.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. And I think, I'm reminded a lot during this entire period, really. I'm reminded a lot of a story that Jim Collins shared in Good to Great years ago about Jim Stockdale, who I know you're a fan of Jim Stockdale. And for those people who are listening and don't know who he was really a hero, was the highest ranking officer at the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. Terrible POW jail, basically, can't even call it a camp. And Stockdale got out. He refused. They offered to let him go a few times, and he refused that because he didn't want to be viewed as getting special privilege because of his rank. And what he told Jim Collins and other people after he finally was back in civilian life many years later, was that the people who survived that experience in the Hanoi Hilton were the ones that believed they were going to get out, but they didn't put a date on it. And the ones who didn't survive were the ones who said, I'll be out by Christmas, I'll be out by Easter, I'll be out by, spring break or whatever when my kids are home. And Easter or Christmas or spring break would come and go, and they're still there. And so they eventually die of hopelessness, right? And that's a dramatic example compared to what most of us are dealing with. But I think the same principle applies. I think, if you're trying to say, well, it'll be over by Christmas, be over by the end of the year when a vaccine comes out. Well, let's say there is a vaccine by the end of the year. There's still in the US 350 million people or so that need to get vaccinated. Do you think that's going to go smoothly? Is that going to go quickly? I don't think so. And so we just have to be realistic about the situation and remain hopeful that we will eventually get through this. That's not always easy, but I think that's the task.
No, it's not. And I think that you provide a personal inspiration. You teach and write about resilience. And part of your understanding of resilience, I think, comes from your own situation, your health, your personal health. You have a chronic condition. So what about resilience? How can leaders become more resilient? How do you frame it?
Yeah, well, so the chronic condition then you mentioned is, I was joking with my wife, Diane, yesterday. I've lost track of how long it's been. I thought it was my 10-year anniversary. And she said, no, last year was your 10-year anniversary. You keep having a 10-year anniversary. But in 2009, summer of 2009, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I write about this a lot in the Overworked and Overwhelmed book and my experience with that, because I wouldn't have written that book probably without the experience of having MS, right? Having had that experience and still having it. But I guess what I learned, and it was really kind of a game changer in my life. I mean, kind of obvious if you have a chronic disease, it would be, but in positive ways that I didn't expect it would be a game changer, right? And so the first couple of years with MS were really rotten. I just felt like crap many, many days, brain fog, physical capabilities really diminished. And certain days, certain weeks, certain months were way worse than other days, weeks, and months. And then you mentioned the yoga in the intro, the yoga instruction. I got into yoga at the suggestion of a friend who's a multi-degreed health expert, but also a yoga teacher. Said, I have really great outcomes with MS patients and Parkinson's when I teach them yoga. And I said, okay, we'll try that. And she was completely right. It started to change my physical capabilities in a few months, weeks or months, really. And then over time, as I kept sticking with it, it started to change other aspects of my life. And I guess what I've learned about resilience through all that is that nothing ever stays the same, good or bad, or who knows, it never stays the same. And so, you wake up from an MS standpoint, you might wake up one morning and say, oh gosh, I don't feel so good today. Well, that's not the rest of my life necessarily, right? It may not even be the rest of my day. And what I've learned is it's not, and so having that understanding that it's not always the rest of your life, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And then routines have been really important to me. And identifying routines physically, mentally, relationally, spiritually that are efficacious, for me and probably for most people, but at least for me. And sticking with those and I didn't start a bunch of routines at once. You layer them in over time, but understanding what leads to good health and well-being and giving yourself good stuff, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but those are some of the lessons learned.
No, I very powerful, because I've always thought about resilience as that ability to bounce back. And there's actually, I think it's Ellen McDard talks about it, because Jesse Lynn Stoner, with whom I speak, what about resilience is a reforming, and that's what you were just talking about. And the other thing I got from your story, Scott, and I know you live this, it's a day-by-day process. And you talked about your routines, and
Mhm.
I would say that should share give you some ideas for client talk, would it not? So
Oh, yeah. Yeah, completely. The question I really like to ask, and prior to the pandemic, I was going to write a book this year called At Your Best. And I thought, well, that's probably too far up the hierarchy of needs for the pandemic.
how about how about at your very worst?
Well, maybe we'll defer on that book for now. But the question I like to ask my clients is, how are you when you're at your best? How do you know yourself to be when you're really in your sweet spot, in the zone, however you think about it? And then what are those routines, physical, mental, relational, spiritual, that help you be at your best? And then finally, what outcomes would you hope or expect to see in your life if you're more or less consistently at your best? Those three questions are what lies underneath a planning framework that Diane and I developed for ourselves 25 years ago that I've shared with clients for the last 20. It's called the Life GPS, and it's a one-page strategic plan for yourself, basically, that we refresh, each of us do every year. And I talk about that in both of my books. And when it feels welcome, I'll bring that up with my clients.
You know what? That's what I like about your work, Scott. Is not only you are a deep thinker, and we'll get into that, but you're very tactical and practical. Like life, you remember that, the life GPS, and it's
Mhm.
such a simple concept. And I don't mean that in a dismissive sense, but
Don't take it that way.
this simple. Well, you're
Simply good.
yeah.
Simply good.
Well, no, I'm simple-minded. No, but it makes it accessible, um,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's what's good.
Well,
So
I think that's right, because people, don't have the time for complexity. They don't have the bandwidth, or especially the clients that you and I work with. They don't have the patience. They don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the space in their life for complexity. There's enough complexity already for us as coaches or advisors to be introducing more. And so I think it's really incumbent on people who do what you and I do, John, to break it down and to make it practical and actionable whenever we can.
right.
So it's helpful, so it's helpful quicker, sooner rather than later.
Fundamental to your work, and to me as well, is purpose. And it's kind of funny. Scott and I have had this conversation. I
Hmm.
read Scott's work, and he reads mine, and I think we both say, "Well, I could have written that," because
Yeah.
we're in a way
We've actually done that on occasion. Yeah.
we're kind of twinsies on certain things.
Yeah.
So, but purpose is central to your work. And so, in the many years that you've taught and coached, what's a lesson that you've gained from purpose, your own purpose, or seeing it in others? So,
Yeah. I mentioned spiritual routines among the four categories of routines that I talked about. And to me, the sort of the killer app, if you will, in the spiritual space is routines that help you tune into your answer to the question, why am I here? Like on this earth, in this life, for this limited amount of time that I have here, why am I here? And you can approach that through religious modalities or not, but I think it's a universal question that human beings have. And when you tap into your answers to that, I think you're going to define your purpose, right? And whether it's at work or at home or out in the world, out in the broader community, or some intersection of those three, right? And so, um, in the Buddhist or Hindu tradition, I guess, not that they're the same thing, but sometimes it's called dharma. Like what's your dharma? Um, what's your calling? What's your vocation? Just there's lots of ways to go at it, and I've thought about that my whole life, and it's constantly under construction, I guess. I'm always asking myself that question and trying to tune into that. And I think the clients and leaders that I've gotten to work with over the years who convey the most power in the best sense of the word power, and we can talk about that as a whole other thing, are really clear, or at least they're in the question and constantly revisiting and tuning back into what their purpose is.
Right. And that's, yeah, I liked how you framed that. I've said to you in a sense that you're you have a pastoral sense about you, and in the secular sense, because I know that you are, I know that it's certainly in your coaching, but you have a depth to you that comes from a connection to spirituality, which gives you credibility, I think, and it gives you a strength that I see as an
Thank you.
outsider. So
Thanks.
great. You wrote a blog the other day that I just caught my attention, and it was the danger of too much optimism. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think the title was something about paralyzed by positivity or something like that. The reason I wrote that, and I have to confess, it was not my most popular blog post. I think it was too counterintuitive, probably. Um, but the point I was trying to make, a lot of the things that I write in the blog these days are sparked by conversations I'm having with clients, or, I see, I'm sure it's the same with you, John. You start to see or identify patterns, in the conversations or themes that keep coming up. And one of the themes that kept coming up for me was in these conversations over the last several months was, we kind of talked about this earlier with the Stockdale story, is, well, it's going to get back to normal pretty soon. And, we're going to be able to go out and call on customers like we used to, or, have a lot of windshield time, or, pretty soon we'll be back in airplanes or whatever. And honestly, I don't think that's probably true, first of all. And second of all, kind of being stuck, paralyzed, if you will, in this idea that it's going to go back to normal keeps you from really considering what else could happen. And I think I talked in that post about, or in one of the posts I've written lately, about scenario planning, and the simplest version being best case, worst case, most likely case.
Right.
And there's enough happening in any given day or week that you can look at and say, okay, if these trends were to continue and we extrapolated, what would we do, right? What if this happened? What if that didn't happen? And I think that's the work of leadership right now, is to keep people focused, maybe not 100%, because you got to still get stuff done in the short run, but at least spend some portion of the collective time considering different scenarios and how we're going to respond to those, and what are the common denominators across the different scenarios that we could imagine. Well, if there are some common denominators, you probably should start acting on those now. And then what small experiments could we run to position ourselves for whatever eventuality might be the longer term play? And as opposed to, well, it's going to get back and we're just going to kind of do minimal maintenance for now until we get back to normal. We're not going to get back to normal. It's going to be really different.
And that's a very valid point. I mean, too much optimism is Pollyanna, and after a while, if you think about it, to blow another metaphor, it's a little too sugary and a little too sweet, and
Yeah,
after a while, people just spit it out, and you lose credibility, I think. So I'm going to ask you a question here, and I have no idea, but you seem to be the perfect person to ask this.
Mhm.
So. What do you think in our discussion? Because you and I spend a lot of time thinking and coaching and writing about leadership. So what's missing? What are we not talking about that you see?
Well, if I knew it, I'd probably be writing about it, right?
See, I know I try to embarrass you. That's my whole point.
Yeah, you told me that. You warned me. So what am I missing, or what are we missing? I don't, even though you warned me, you might ask me that. I don't really have a good answer for that one, John.
I don't either, but here's
I'll do what a coach does. What do you think, John? What do you think we're missing?
No, I wanted to ask you that, and it's because I think we're so focused on the day-to-day, getting by, and the routines that you talked about, which are necessary for navigation. So maybe we're not thinking long-term. Maybe we're too short-term fixed, and that's not a negative right now. Or maybe I think the buzzword of our time, and I don't like to say this, but is empathy. And which is a powerful concept. But so what's your take on empathy and our discussion on that? So
I think empathy is the currency of the realm right now, or the coin of the realm. And I knew this would happen. You prompted a thought on what we're missing too while you're talking about. So I'll come back to that in a minute too. But the empathy thing, when the pandemic first started, or at least it started to have an impact that we could see in society in the U.S. at least, back in March. I pretty quickly came to the conclusion. I just referenced the Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little while ago. There are 5 layers to that. Starting from the bottom, the base of the pyramid is just basic biological survival needs, right? And then the next layer up is a little bit higher order survival needs: shelter, money, employment, other kind of higher order health issues. And then the third layer is, I've seen usually described as the need for love and belonging, right? And then the 2 layers after that are, if I remember correctly, self-esteem is the 4th layer, and the top layer is self-actualization. And I pretty quickly thought at the beginning of the pandemic, wow, there's not going to be a lot of people that are primarily concerned with self-esteem and self-actualization right now. We're sort of dropping down the layer of the pyramid, and the love and belonging piece, I think, is critical. And another word for that is empathy, or an offshoot of that at least is empathy. And you think about how we've all behaved during the pandemic in our virtual worlds. Even this conversation is a good example of it. We still need to be connected, even though we can't be in physical space with each other usually. And we're doing anything we can come up with. We're being incredibly creative, really, about how we get that connection. And that connection then leads to empathy. And I think the challenge that we're starting to have now, or we've had it for a while, and the time of year when kids go back to school make it even more pronounced, is empathy for the situations that our friends and colleagues are in, and how different it can be from household to household, right? And tuning into that, and being creative and flexible and empathetic, especially from a leadership standpoint. One size does not fit all. One policy does not fit all. And your colleagues who are having to do Zoom school again with their grade schoolers, and they both spouses work, or it's a single parent household, and they don't have external childcare, which most of us don't at this point, even if you had it before. It's just, we've got to be open to alternatives.
It's a great answer, and I couldn't embarrass you. So
well, no, actually, but I do want to come back to what are we missing. And you talked about, I can't remember exactly what you said, but what came to mind was one of my favorite metaphors. I always talk about this. People sick of hearing me talk about it. It comes from Ron Heifetz at the Kennedy School, great leadership thinker there. And he makes the point that leaders can either be on the dance floor or they can be on the balcony. And it's important to alternate your perspective really between the two, right? And I think in times like this, where we're really just trying to keep the trains running and keep the ship afloat and all those kinds of metaphors, it can be really easy to over-index on the dance floor. Like, what do I need to do today? What do I need to do today? What do we need to do today? And under-index on, let's just take a breath and pull the lens back and look at the bigger picture from the balcony perspective.
Right.
And engage with each other on those what if kinds of questions, and how do we respond to all these possibilities that are out there, good and bad. Good possibilities.
True. It's and I like that metaphor of the dance floor versus the balcony. And so often it comes. There's a thinker who's been, and teacher who's seminal influence on my development as in my writing, is Michael Useem at Wharton, and he talks about this kind of thing, and he talks about in mountain climbing and things like that, the command chief or whoever it is, and the same thing with fire, they're always a little bit step removed from the actual action. I mean, they're down at base camp or something or close to it because they have a different viewpoint. And that's part of that's being on the balcony. But then the people on the ground too. It's that balance between the two. So you had asked earlier, we do get some comments about and some of the things. And Joan Kling has written in about some themes that I echo in Grace. She talks about forgiveness and tolerance and compassion. All of those are critical to where we are right now. And I know those are thoughts that are important to you in your life and what you teach and coach, Scott. So,
yeah, definitely. Thanks, Joan.
Yeah,
somebody out there listening and commenting.
That's good. Well, you have your fan base there. They follow you everywhere.
It's your show, John.
So, what do you tell leaders who are feeling fear? So.
What do I tell them? What are you afraid of? That's a good question. And so, it's sort of the name it and claim it, right? Because I think a lot of times we have a sense of anxiety or fear, and we haven't really even articulated why that is, and where's that coming from? And there's a couple of talking about blog posts. There's a blog post that I wrote a few weeks or months ago called "Leading in the Time Frames of Mind." And what I mean by that is, I think verb tenses are really instructive to tell us where our heads are, past, present, and future, right? And so, what verb tense is your mindset in? Or is what frame of mind? What verb tense, and how does it match up with the frame of mind? Like past tense, quite often can look like longing. It can look like regret. It can look like sorrow or a sense of loss or grief, and I think a lot of people are feeling grief even still this many months into the pandemic. I mean, obviously, if you've had a family member or friend pass away from COVID, you have grief with that for sure, but grief for the things in our life that we've lost or the things in our business that we've lost or all the above, right? Future-wise, this is where the fear comes in. It leads anxiety and uncertainty and discomfort, and so then we get back into the present tense, and it really comes down to what can you do? What can you do about it? There's a friend and colleague of mine named Alexander Kaye who's been on the faculty at the Georgetown coaching program forever, and he's a really smart guy. And Alexander talks a lot about a model that he came up with years ago called the thinking path. And I've been talking a lot with my clients about that this summer. And I think they find it really helpful. And you can, for people listening, if you've got a piece of paper, just draw out on the piece of paper, draw the letter R over on the right-hand side of the paper. Okay, that R stands for results. Okay, so then you ask yourself, well, where do results come from? Well, results come from actions, right? So draw an A to the left of the R and a little arrow from the A to the R. Okay, actions lead to results, right? Where do actions come from? Well, actions start initially with a thought, right? Or a set of thoughts. I have to think about it before I can do it. So draw a T over on the left-hand side of your piece of paper, over on the far left. That stands for thinking. And then draw an arrow out of T, but then there should be a gap probably between the T and the A. And what comes between the thinking and the action? What comes is the feeling. It's the emotional state. So draw an F in there if you're doing this with me. And that F, draw an arrow to the action, because the actions flow most immediately from the feeling. All right. And it doesn't flow from the thought, because there's an emotional state between the thought and the action. And so if I'm fearful, and that's the state I'm in most of the time, my actions are going to come from a place of fear, and my results are going to be coming from the same place, and you're going to be suboptimal in all likelihood, right? And so how do I need to be instead? Well, I need to be hopeful. I need to be optimistic. I need to be action oriented. I need to feel like I have agency, or whatever it is, all those things that would lead to positive actions. And this is true for you, and it's true for the people you lead. So how do you need to feel? How do you need them to feel? And what can you do as a leader of yourself and of others to get in that place? And I come back, I'm kind of rambling here, John, but I'm almost done. one of the really influential books that I've read over the years and really shaped the way I approach coaching and consulting and advising leaders is Authentic Happiness by Martin Seligman. And he's the godfather of the positive psychology movement, which if you're not familiar with that, people listening, I know you are, John, but it's, he had the brilliant insight that psychology over the years has mainly been the study of mentally diseased people. And let's figure out what good health looks like from a psychological standpoint by studying people who are not in good health. What if we've looked at really highly functional people and drew our conclusions from them? And one of the things he concluded was that the really highly functional people are really good at a process he calls disputation. So like, I'm fearful. Why am I fearful? Well, because this might happen or that might happen. Okay, what's the likelihood of that really? And even if it did, what's the worst that could happen? Well, it's really not as bad as I thought it would be. Okay, well, let me then reverse engineer back from that and start thinking about, okay, what can I do instead to hopefully avoid that situation, or at least to mitigate the impact of that as we go. So I don't know, that's a lot there, but I spewed all over you.
That's a good exercise. Would you repeat those letters real quickly?
Yeah. So let's do it this time from left to right, okay? On the left-hand side, the beginning of this thinking path is a T, okay? And that stands for the thought or the set of thoughts. And there's an arrow that leads to an F. That's the feeling that results from the thinking process, right? Flowing from the feeling to the action, there's an A there for action. And then A leads to R, which is the results. Thinking leads to feeling, leads to actions, ultimately leads to the results.
Great. Thank you. We're coming to the end of our show. So I want to ask you if you have a personal story of grace that you've experienced or that you like to share, example.
I have lots of them. And I thought about this because I know it's a theme. It's a great theme. It's such an important thing to talk about and think about and act on. So I thought about it beforehand. I said, well, where have I experienced the most grace in my life? And it's probably from people forgiving me. and it's usually forgiving me for something stupid that I said. And it's like, I wrote a blog post years ago called "Let Me Entertain Me," and it was about my true confessions of being a recovering smartass. Like you never fully are not an alcoholic. You're always a recovering alcoholic. I'm a recovering smartass. I'm never not going to be a smartass. But being a smartass, for me at least, was about entertaining me. And I would say things. I have some horrific stories of things that I've said. Just, it's out of my mouth before I even realized it was in my brain. And I've been really fortunate that I've had people forgive me for that over the years. And it's been good, it's been good calibration trying to be better with that.
It's a great story. I like that. Scott, we're coming to the end. So how can people find you?
Yeah, sure. Google me, it's just like we do these days, but eblingroup.com is my company's website. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so I would love folks listening if we could connect on LinkedIn or follow me on LinkedIn. That'd be great. My blog usually shows up on LinkedIn. It shows up on our website. We've talked a lot about the blogging today, so that's where that is. And then the books are wherever books are sold.
Great. Scott, you've been a terrific guest.
Easy to get
it out. I'm overwhelmed by your presence.
I can see that. Yeah.
Anyway, you've been a terrific guest, and you are a man of grace, and thank you. So till next time, we're going to close it out.